Picture this. You're in the theater for the latest Spider-Man reboot, trying to ignore the theater employees in the corner of the room, patiently waiting for you to leave because the movie's been over for 5 minutes. Finally, the credits roll, and there's a big Made in Nevada logo, or something. That is the dream of two bills making their way through the legislature right now that are trying to give big tax breaks to film studios in Nevada. But is that a good idea? This week, we tackle film tax credits and whether giving film studios a comically large bag of money is worth it in the end. From Battle Born Progress, this is Battle Born Bytes. My name is Jacob. Let's give it the old college try. So, spoiler alert, we here at Battle Born Progress think the film tax credits are not a great idea. Wow, imagine an episode as easy as that. Pack it up. Today's show is edited by me. In all seriousness, we wanted to give you the full picture. Knowledge is power and so forth. So today we're going to dive into how we got here, how all this is going to work, and again, whether or not any of this is a good idea. But first, a quick history lesson. Film tax credits essentially go back to the early 1990s when Louisiana passes the nation's first tax credit for films in 1992. A quick definition here, film tax credits might differ from your sort of normal tax credits that you get on your own taxes because a lot of the time they're transferable. That usually means that whatever company got the film tax credit can actually sell that tax credit after the fact for cash. Neat, I guess. Anyways, Louisiana's tax credit gets increased dramatically in 2002, and 10 years later, everyone's calling Louisiana Hollywood South. Foreshadowing, guess how long that will last? This doesn't go unnoticed by other state governments. In 2002, for instance, there are 5 states that have some form of film tax credit. By 2009, that's 44 other states. Notably, one state just shoots for the moon and says, what if we just didn't cap tax credits for films? You may guess what this state is, and you'd be right. It's Georgia. It's the Georgia Peach. Everyone ever seen the Georgia Peach at the end of a Marvel movie? Well, that's why. Tax credits, baby. That logo is there because Georgia taxpayers are shelling out. Right now, Georgia's spending over $1 billion in taxpayer money for each of the last few years, and it's gotten so big that lawmakers last year tried to cap it at $900 million, which is still an insane amount of money, and then decided not to do that. But what about Nevada? Well, Nevada experiments with the film tax credit game in 2013 by approving $20 million annually in film tax credits for a 4-year trial run. In 2014, that is immediately rolled back because Nevada decides to shunt most of that money over to Tesla in order to build a giant battery factory up north. How time changes us all. So what we're left with is a $10 million credit in Nevada, of which $6 million is the maximum that any one production can use at a time. Because that is relatively modest in the scope of all the tax credits nationwide, Nevada has tried to sell itself with an apples and oranges comparison to other states like Louisiana, New Mexico, and Georgia. And I'm not kidding, here's a state-made graphic with apples and oranges on it. It's giving graphic design is my passion. This all brings us to 2023, when Nevada starts flirting with much larger tax credits. Things reached a fever pitch in Carson City, actually, when Mark Wahlberg and Jeremy Renner showed up, of Hawkeye fame. But that bill was also introduced with about a month left to go in the legislative session, and with legislators having many bigger fish to fry at the time, the bill didn't go anywhere and never actually got a vote. But crucially, for context here, what that bill wanted was to build a studio in Southern Nevada that would get up to $190 million annually in film tax credits. That was an amount that no one really loved, so why didn't that bill go anywhere? Who can say? So, as you may have heard, there are not one, but 2 bills to expand tax credits for films in Nevada.
I'm seeing double here. 4 crusties!
However, both bills operate in similar ways. This is less about the amount of money the bills have in them for film tax credits. Both are octupling that $10 million number. But really, it's about who gets that money in the first place. The first bill, AB 238, would bump Nevada's $10 million to $25 million available to any production. Second, it would set aside $80 million per year for a studio to be built in Summerlin on the west side of Las Vegas. The other bill is SB 220, which I'm so glad there's so many twos. I will never mix up these two bills. SB 220 basically revives the 2023 film tax credit bill through vibes and making the film tax credits smaller. Similar to the other bill, it would increase the amount of general film tax credits available to any production from $10 million to $15 million per year. But the big thing is that it would pick another studio in the southwest of Las Vegas that would get $83 million per year. It would also have a different developer from the other bill. So remember, different bills, different sites, different developers, different everything. Crucially, this developer, Bircher, is the developer that worked with the 2023 bill. And up until early this year, Bircher was working with Warner Brothers to be the studio of choice to get this giant pot of $83 million in tax money. But I say until January because, as the Nevada Independent reported at the time, they broke off the deal. Warner says they're still interested in Nevada studios, but it's unclear exactly what that means at this point, with both of these bills now floating in the legislative wild. However, Warner Brothers does have 2 lobbyists in Carson City, so make of that what you will. Wow, look at that. It's Jacob from the future interrupting Jacob from the past. Big update on this. It turns out we found out what those Warner Brothers lobbyists were doing. They were talking with Sony so that they could both be on one bill, AB 238, and more on that later. All right, back to past Jacob. There are some additional details in each bill about, how are these things structured? How exactly does this money get distributed? Oh, everyone loves the details. It's actually so dense that I'm not going to explain it here, and I've linked some explainers in the description below. But TLDR here, look, both of these bills have sunset clauses after about 15 years, after which points the legislature would have to decide if they want to keep funding these tax credits in the first place. But even if we assume this 15-year timeline is finite, that's over $1.4 billion on the high end for these bills. Just for context, that's not nothing. Nevada's entire budget for the next 2 years is $12.7 billion. Crucially, to say nothing of the political appetite in either the democratically controlled legislature or the Republican governor's office for either of these bills, there has already been a lot of hand-wringing over the fact that there's 2 bills. And both bill sponsors have essentially said only one bill will survive.
There can be only one.
Which bill is the one bill? We don't know yet, but only one bill has so far gotten a hearing. That's the Assembly one. And that minute is now. The hearing for SB 238, sponsored by Assemblymember Sandra Jauregui, lasted a crisp 4 hours and 33 minutes this week, including both hours of questioning from legislators and testimony from the public. Just to TLDR those 4.5 hours, we actually got a new proposed amendment that would increase the tax credits at the Summerlin studio from $80 million to $95 million, presumably because it would include both Sony Pictures and Warner Brothers instead of just Sony. Add the other non-Summerlin tax credits, still another $15 million per year, and we're now at $110 million a year, or more than $1.6 billion over the 15 years outlined by the bill. But for anyone not used to being glued to legislative hearings, these kinds of initial hearings are usually the people trying to get the tax credits, in this case Sony and Warner Brothers, putting their best foot forward, trying to make a case that this is actually a great idea with slick videos and company vice presidents on hand to take questions. Sometimes you can even see them try to remember not to mispronounce Nevada in real time.
Nevada's like Nevada. Thank you for your time.
But this is only the very first stage of the process. Theoretically, if this bill moves forward, it will still need to go through a vote in committee, then the Assembly floor, then repeat this all again in the Senate. At any stage in that process, it can, and at this point probably will, be amended again, which could trigger another stage where both houses have to agree to a single version of the bill language. Only then will it go to the governor, who still might veto this thing anyway. At this point, Lombardo hasn't said a ton about film tax credits, but what he has said, charitably, not enthusiastic. Talking to KTNV Channel 13 in Las Vegas earlier this month, he said, quote, "Once again, the devil's in the details, right? And as you presented, the narrative you just provided, I'm not supportive as the governor. I'm not supportive." Okay, enough of that. Back to the old me. The other bill, the Senate one, sponsored by Senator Roberta Lang, she actually sponsored the 2023 bill too, and her bill hasn't gone anywhere yet. But I am here to remind you viewers at home that it only February, and the legislature adjourns in June, so buckle up, I guess. So in the interest of fairness, I'm going to steelman these bills for a hot second. Proponents say this is ultimately about diversifying Nevada's economy. Now, that's not a new goal for politicians in Nevada. You may remember Governor Brian Sandoval once created a whole-ass new agency just to do that. And Nevada has spent literally years trying to entice warehousing, manufacturing, data centers, whatever, into the desert. Build here so we don't have to rely on casinos so much in case, I don't know, a pandemic happens. But if these tax credit bills work like proponents say they will, then it could prop up a new industry out of whole cloth, employing thousands of people in an industry that wouldn't exist otherwise, and playing on our geographic proximity to Southern California. But, and this is a big but, if this all works like they say it will, is a load-bearing part of that argument. Unfortunately, there's actually no guarantee that this will work like they say it will work, because none of these tax credit programs work in a vacuum. For decades, critics of these kinds of tax credit giveaways have called this a race to the bottom, because every state and every country is trying to outdo each other with these outrageous tax packages to try and lure film studios to their whatever. And none of this is actually theoretical. While Nevada is debating something on the order of, we'll call it $80 million in tax credits annually, California is considering doubling the size of their state film tax credit to $750 million annually. This also assumes that these tax credit bills will create the jobs they say they will. Let's take a look at New York, for instance, which has spent $7 billion over the last 20 years on film tax credit subsidies. Last year, an independent review of these film tax subsidies found no positive return on investment for New York. And, maybe more importantly, it found that in the absence of these film tax subsidies, there is no guarantee that whatever industry was created by their existence in the first place would actually stay, because these film studios will always look for the biggest tax subsidy they can get. I'll just quote this one directly. Based on an objective weighing of the costs and benefits, the film production credit is at best a break-even proposition and more likely a net cost to New York State. I'm not going to add anything. And we haven't even gotten to the studios involved here, which I'm going to be real, don't have an amazing track record with quality content or relationships with labor. Sony, the studio that brought us Morbius and Madam Web, had to settle in 2016 a $13 million lawsuit that it colluded with other studios in order to suppress wages and work opportunities for animators. Separately, and more recently, Sony Pictures CEO Tony Vinciquerra basically blamed union contracts on studios, like Sony, looking to fund more productions overseas in the UK or Canada. Warner Brothers is what we'll call in financial difficulties. Just in his example, they were recently unable to retain the rights to broadcast NBA games, losing out on a bid to Amazon. Instead of, trying to win a bid, they decided to sue the NBA and said, no, you have to do business with us. This did not go anywhere. Separately, to cut costs, Warner Brothers famously at this point shelved multiple completely finished movies. That includes a Batgirl movie and a Looney Tunes movie, just so they could keep the tax write-off instead. And finally, like I said earlier, none of this happens in a vacuum, and we can't really ignore the other budget headwinds either. If you watched last week's episode on Medicaid, then you'll know the state could stand to lose $1.8 billion annually if Congress decides to cut Medicaid. Absent that money, it raises serious questions if the state also has even $80 million per year to give to film tax credits. But that does it for this week's episode. If you like the show, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, do all the YouTube things so you'll be the first to know when we upload a new episode. Till next week, from Battle Born Progress, this has been Battle Born Bytes. We'll see you next week.